Good heavens, time flies. In a flash, it's almost 4 months since I reviewed the new Creators model Rathalos version 2.0, and I kept delaying on its better half, the Rathian version 2.0. So it's time I got down to it. Now for the box, you can see from the sides, there are different photographs, which is a nice touch. And it also makes clear that this pairs with the Rathalos as part of the diorama. And so here's Rathian out of the box. This time, it's got more of a surrounding environment to interact with than the previous version. So let's take a closer look. So now we have the side profile of Rathian. There are the very tiny beady eyes over here, and a side spike here. Of course, there are those interlocking, overlapping plates. In fact, this is the female version of Rathalos, so it's not surprising there are similarities. You see that textured detail down here over the ear, going down the mandible, again having the same kind of color gradations we saw in Rathalos. The teeth here, you can already see, are very nicely and carefully painted. And here's the detail inside the mouth. There isn't so much of that rasping surface we saw in Rathalos, although there is texture. The care in the texture of the ear is a real winner for me. And here you see the very fierce appearance in the profile. Just lots and lots of detail. There's what seems to be a lip over here. And then over here, you see all this kind of etched-in detail. Very nice. And again, all the gradations of color in here are very subtly blended. The subdued look has kind of grown on me, which we see in these new versions. Now moving into the neck area, it's a bit hard to see, but I can see all that grainy texture and the divisions of those different plates and such. And here in the throat area of Rathian, with very thick skin, we see the skin folds. I like detail like this, where you see on this fold here are all those scales separated. We see here the upper palate of Rathian. Now just a quick look at the side of the body here. Unfortunately, much of the body is actually quite obscured, but I think you can see the very interesting combination we saw in Rathalos, with all that texture and detail there. And here's what even looks like the interdigitations of the serratus muscle. A nice anatomical detail. And on the other side, now it's a bit hard to see, so we might as well look at the shoulder region now. Here these very interesting structures look like pauldrons of very sharp, overlapping stone. Now I've noted before the rather inorganic look of some of these scales in Rathalos, so it might just be a feature of the species. And here we see the appearance of the shoulders on the right side. And just look at the detail on the medial side of the arm. We've seen this in Rathalos. Now going to the wings now. Now in the wing arm, you see that detail we also saw in Rathalos. I really like this flap of skin here, with all these rectilinear scales. The longitudinal scales coming up. And just like with Rathalos, you see here probably the flexor pollicis tendon. And here we have the medial side of the left arm. I'm loving these scales on the forearm as well. And whoa, look at that. I love detail like this. For example, you see again that raised tendon going up into the thumb area. And since we're here, we might as well track up to the arm. Now we see these tessellated scales here, all the way to the tip of that finger. Very raised scales as well, with a reticulated scale pattern. Now you see here once again that detail. I can already see some of that membrane and skin. You see these jagged edges are actually made up of individual spikes. It's very well weathered, a very lived-in animal. Now these wing spots here, you can hardly make them out as they're faded very nicely into the wing membrane and are not so stark. You see the kind of cragginess in the surface. Again, with these eye spots faded in, it reminds me of the St. George dragon. And here we are again with that tooth edge made up of individual sharp scales. I think you can see overall the idea behind the whole wing structure. And here you see the biceps, just like we did with Rathalos. And also that thumb flexor tendon here. And here's the interesting shoulder structure. The wing arm. Now here the wing arm is shrouded in shadows, but the design is again very nice. Look at the texture of these scales here. I love those rows of rectilinear scales. We see weathering on the wings. Now, these spots looked a bit artificial to me in the original Rathian, but here it's much more integrated. And you see here the structure at the edges clearly show that these are made of distinct scales. And I love the way the extended wing fingers are hinted at. Look at all those cracks. It's really like a living animal. And now here, looking at the legs, there's perhaps a muscular bulge in the soft tissue. Look where you can see the tendon here. And now here we get to the business end of that tail weapon, and the structure is very different from Rathalos. So there's a bit of sexual dimorphism here. Just look at that smooth blend of colors. And from here, you can really see the form of the very wicked looking tail. And on the other side is where I feel that maybe it's a bit more simply painted. Perhaps some dry brushing with some black would have looked very nice. And so now we come to the base. At first it looks like very ordinary rock. But as you move upward, you realize that Rathian is actually interacting with a huge root system, or tree structure, which immediately makes the diorama more interesting. And although it looks dull at first, there's actually an infusion of green here, which you can appreciate only if your lighting is right. And I really like the form of this claw gripping on. Look at the beautiful detail in the phalanx with those overlapping plates. Might as well look at the leg here as well. Now the idea of one leg gripping the floor and the other one gripping the root gives a sense of an animal interacting with a real environment. Now here's what might be old, petrified wood. You can see remnants, perhaps of some growth rings here. And on the other side, I think you can start to see some of those infusions of green. This was once a living organism. Very nice. The Rathalos too had its secrets, and here we see Rathian too's, which is a nest of eggs she's guarding. Now just look at how naturally these eggs are colored. The spotted eggs really add interest to this wyvern. And so zooming out, we see Rathian very nicely interacting with the base. It's looking upwards, skewed to one side, looking pretty dangerous. I will say, however, if I turn around over here, you'll see from this angle, the face is not on this sagittal plane, but tilted. So unless you're looking somewhat top-down, you might not actually like how it presents. Now, this might not actually be a very exciting view. And coming around here, I love the idea of the eggs being sheltered by some of these roots here, and also just the pose of those legs. Really action-packed. Because it's not a convenient surface, this girl's really working hard to hold on. And here again, that tilt away from the sagittal plane. So in terms of display, I'd say that maybe from here to maybe here is where it probably looks the best. Now why the tilted head? Well, the reason can be seen if we bring in Rathalos. Now I think you can see the logic of that tilted head and the curvature of the neck. The mated pair is very nicely thought out. Now maybe they're having a couple's quarrel. Maybe she's annoyed that he didn't deliver on his promise of food. In any case, the cohesion of the overall scene is clear. To add to that, remember that tall base? Well, you could have it like that. And you can see Rathalos towering over his queen and offspring. Very, very tall. I'm going to pull back a bit just to show you the effect of it. You see here now, we really have a sense of the environment that Rathalos and Rathian are in. I've got to say though, that even if I had the space for it, I still feel the lower base gives you a greater sense of interaction between the two. So I think this is how I'll display them together. If I were to display Rathalos alone, that's where the taller base can actually serve a very interesting role. Just really liking this. Alright, so let's compare Rathian 2 to Rathian 1. And just like we saw with Rathalos, there's quite a height difference, though not quite as dramatic as we saw between the new and old Rathalos. Just like the aesthetic with Rathalos 1.0, the original Rathian is more craggy in nature. But I think because of the way the color was also quite subdued, you still get a very complex look with color gradations. Now comparing the two, I think the difference in complexity is definitely there, with version 2 having a slight edge in maturity. But because even Rathian 1's paint application is quite subdued, the difference in vibrancy isn't as stark as between the new and old Rathalos. Unfortunately, it's a bit hard to see, but I think looking at the back plates here gives you an idea of what you can see in the neck and on down as well. Now we look at the tail. Look at the very smooth blends. There's a detail in the tail. You can see there's a huge mass of tines here compared to the original Rathian. Now looking at the wing arm, it's more craggy, but not cheap and contrived. And as for the wing here, I can see those eye spots, which are still not starkly painted, though they contrast more than on the new Rathian. And for the wings themselves, they're both rather grainy. New Rathian, you can see those eye spots have faded. So in fact, you could say that Rathian 2 is probably a larger and older Rathian than version 1. The legs are a bit harder to see, being overshadowed by the wings, but I think you can see them again, very craggy, very knobbly detail. Here you see that it's actually more plated. There's more color differentiation. It even seems to have more detail on the feet as well. And so now, just some thoughts on the pose. As a diorama, I think this works very well. It's nice and dynamic, and just very naturalistic. These animals just look like real animals instead of the stylized kind of colors you get from a computer game. Which is not wrong if you love the games and you want a direct reminder of them. However, this skew in the face does mean that from angles like this, if you're looking at it straight on, you can end up seeing it somewhat from below and the side, which may not be very satisfying. On the other hand, when you look at the previous Rathian with his wings spread out like that, and with the face pretty much vertically aligned, you can see that from a variety of angles it will look good. And so in terms of viewing angle, the original has more versatility. Death alignment means that even from the back, you've got an action-packed animal, and there's always something interesting to see. Comparing again to the new Rathian, still very nice, but then there are areas that are kind of blocked by this. There are very nice details which are a bit hard to see, like in the legs and in the back. Whereas in the original Rathian, you see how all the detail is seen very clearly with wing spread. So while both versions are very nice, if I could only get one as a standalone, I prefer the older version. And so I think for a new dragon or wyvern collector, or even a season 1 without a Rathian in your collection, you'd do very well to get version 1. Of course, this is provided you can get the original run, because those original colors are amazing. And we've seen before how reissues can have really crappy paint jobs, which just isn't right, since they're charged at the same premium prices and should not shortchange on paint application. And so there we have it, the 2 Rathalos and our 2 Rathians, and certainly a very good purchase. What I really like about these is that you've got the action, the poses, the color, but also how they interact with the bases. Very thoughtful and purposeful. I will say this, for the Monster Hunter fan, a solid buy. And so thanks once again to Amir Alavi for your recommendation and helping me to spend my money. And guys, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay, this pose looks really good. I think I'll use that for the thumbnail.